Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Consciously Curious with Katie and Sarah. And today we wanted to share, a couple episodes ago, we were talking about the self in general, about like parts and inner child and like the self that kind of carries it all together. And some people call it the higher self, some people call it the soul, the spirit, whatever. And so we thought we would do for this episode, what is that? What is the higher self? And just kind of throw out a couple ideas from our understanding, both as practitioners who've like dealt with hundreds of higher self sessions, our research behind it with books and theories and blogs and different kinds of things, and then obviously our own experience as people who have done many higher self sessions and kind of like can go in and out of talking with our higher self. So we're just going to throw a bunch of stuff at you regarding the higher self, and you can kind of parse through it yourselves and then decide what you think the higher self is. So what do you think? Is that a good intro?
Love it.
Love it. Why not? So yeah, Sarah and I, how do we start? Do you want to start or should I start about what is the first time maybe that you even heard the concept higher self, or like maybe a way you grew up knowing the higher self, or like the origin story of you and the higher self? Maybe we start there. Because I
Gosh, I
didn't think
love that.
I didn't know that much about the higher self till later in life. Kind
Yeah.
of. I kind of have an instinct, but I don't know. What about you?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I don't really think I had a clue what higher self was. I'd never heard the term before. I would say throughout my childhood, throughout my like, young adulthood, I really had no idea. And I can't say that I really tapped into her all that often.
Mhm.
Because my life before my Saturn return, especially, was more just
Age
focused
28, 29, and 30
on
for
the
those
next
of you
thing.
following
Yeah.
along.
Yes. Thank you. Yeah. Before age 28, for sure, I was more focused on um, just the next thing. Like,
Yeah.
I was just very much like next thing, next thing, next thing. So my spiritual awareness and really only happened once after like age 26, where I started getting more into this space and more people started talking about using weird words like higher self. And I was
Good
like,
point.
well, what is that? What about for you, Katie?
Wow, you know what? I would have never have said that until you said the phrase Saturn Returns. That mine was also around the same age, Saturn Returns, like
Yeah.
that I got really like linked into it. For those of you that are like, what are they talking about? Um, the Saturn placement when you were born in the sky, like the planet Saturn, takes about 28 to 29 years of your life to get back to the same placement. And so for many people, their Saturn returns is a quarter life crisis where
Mhm.
like everything in your life kind of comes back at you and you have to like review it, reflect on it, and either make some changes and completely shift your life or ignore it and then have a huge midlife crisis. So Saturn's like crisis much, like it wants to give you crisis, which that's great. You probably
It's
need
great.
half those crises,
My
yeah,
life changed definitely
for
for the
the
better,
best. Yeah, mine too. So
but
how
it was
about
crazy.
mine? Was probably I mean good question. Didn't say the word higher self as a young person, but I did have a connection with mine. And I do feel like I always had more of a sense that there was another version of me somewhere else. I did. I
Mm.
had that sense. And it wasn't validated though until my Saturn returns age, which is when I had my first past life regression and my first life between lives session and met my higher self. Right.
Oh,
And so that really did validate the same thing of like when I was 28, 29. I've talked about it maybe in another one of the podcasts, but I was in a church, adorably, in Spain, and I said to God, because I was having a quarter life crisis, and I had an existential moment, and I was like, God, what am I supposed to do now? And I heard in my ear, look into your past lives. And I was like, in a church? It's like, like, you
God.
sure? Like, I was not in a Hindu temple. I was in a Catholic church. And I was like, come again? But I did. I went, I had my first past life regression at age 29 and learned I was, I had another life, but then like speaking to my higher self in that, like afterwards, which is kind of the way we work now. We always make sure the client talks to their higher self about like, why'd you show me this life? My practitioner did the same thing. And that was like the coolest experience And then when I did a Life Between Lives session, I really talked to my higher self, and they were like, yo, this is me. Like, I'm up here, you're down there, and like gave me the whole rundown on how it all works. And so similar to you, it wasn't until my third, like 20, because I did that one when I was like 30, I think. Like I didn't really have an understanding of what it was until, midlife, pretty much,
Hmm.
or, quarter life, whatever we call that. But
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, and I think even that said, I agree with you. I had some flashes, moments. It was, I think maybe
Mhm.
even less for me earlier in my life where I would hear from my higher self, and I felt
Yeah.
like a lot of times for directional guidance, even like started hearing a lot right before my Saturn return. I started hearing a lot, you need to slow down, you need to slow down.
Yes.
Like messages like that kind of coming through, and I was like, what is that? Like, where is this coming from? Because I was in a state of like fight or flight in my nervous
Yeah.
system, like all the time, working my corporate job. Everything was like emergency. Everything was like timed
Yeah.
out in my life. It felt like I
I
never
was
really
like
had
that.
a pause. And I needed to create some space to even hear my higher self in the first
Yeah.
place because I was in
Yes.
this place where I honestly couldn't really connect too much beforehand.
Um,
And no judgment to that
and
version
I
of
think that's
myself.
by design, actually. So,
Mm.
like, I think maybe there is a part, in my opinion, unless you come into a cultural or religious upbringing that really, really reminds you about the higher self from the very get-go, I think there is something that we are meant to be doing in the material realm in our in our first adulthood. Carl Jung would call it, in our first
Mm-hmm.
adulthood, in our childhood, you are supposed to be immersed in the material. I really do think that. I think you're supposed to understand your ego development. You're supposed to be very material and physical. And then when you have the whisper of the higher self to like, remember me, you know,
Remember who you are.
I'm in the other spiritual realm, reconnect. And if you do, then like that just catapults you for the next side of your life where you can actually have these like toggles between the material and the spiritual. Because I think maybe you wouldn't necessarily have the grounding and the footing if you were always toggling your whole life. Like that might be more difficult or not. I don't know. Because we had the first, right? The first example of like being in your material world.
Mm-hmm.
But let's give some definitions and or metaphors of the higher self. I have a couple. Do you want to give one that you may use? Yeah.
No, you begin. I
Should I
like
go? All right. I got tons. So many.
get
Okay.
ready, folks.
Are you ready for this? So I'm going to do two at once because I think the first one is like so simple, but the second one is like more modern. So the first example of what a higher self even is that within all of our souls, we have a material half and a spiritual half. And when we're born, the material half comes to earth and the spiritual half stays in wherever the fuck that is, the spiritual realm. And by the way, I don't PG-13, Katie swears a lot in her examples. But wherever the fuck that is, there is a spiritual part of you that is one part of the same energy that isn't the material part. It stays in a spiritual realm, and your material self goes and lives this earth body life. But the cool part is that you can access and like talk to that spiritual part of you anytime you want. The more modern example that I always give, because I had a really good client once that was like, I don't understand. Can you explain that a better way? And I was like, okay, you, and he liked video games. I was like, you are Mario, and the higher self is player one. Player one is playing Mario. So, like, player one is your higher self, and it not only can make Mario do things, but it can like put situations at play for Mario to experience because player one can see all of the levels and all of the characters and all of the things at once that Mario cannot see because Mario has to live like linear and like just bounce through life in like a very like structured linear way. But the higher self can actually see everything all at once and put in scenarios for Mario to get into. But like have like a cheat code if you want to like get some information from player one to kind of help you at your levels to like go ahead into the next level. And it's not a bad thing. Like you did agree that you didn't want to remember that you even had a player one and that you just wanted to be Mario. Like you did agree to that, but you can always kind of get like a quick cheat code and be like, yo, player one, is there anything coming up ahead that I should be aware of? You know, that kind of thing. And that the player one will oblige and they will help you and they will put you in the right kind of circumstances that you need to be in. I got a lot other metaphors, but those are my first two thoughts.
Yeah, I love those. I think it's a really approachable way to describe something that could seem kind of just really abstract. And I'd say at the simplest terms, then the higher self is just this aspect of you that is you, but not you.
Yeah, not physical you.
Hades. Exactly, not physical you.
You, but
And
not you, you know, the
it's a part of
you.
you because it is player one, because it's removed from Mario, it has a bigger perspective on things. So oftentimes it
Yeah,
can see more of the design than you can see right now. And it's
right,
not panicked about the day-to-day human experiences
right.
because it knows it can see your past, your middle, and your future. It can see all of that. And so in the terms of how we often interact with the higher self, it's often used as a tool for guidance,
Yeah.
a a frequency pinpoint to
Mm.
name a certain frequency that you can receive really helpful guidance from. And so some people call it the higher self, some people they call it what else? What other names are
The
for the higher?
subconscious, the
Yeah.
spirit, the soul,
Hmm.
um, the source, you know, that these types of things I find, and I also find like, gosh, we can go down so many routes. Okay, why would someone come to you to meet their higher self? Because I have a lot of clients that want to meet their higher self. And I always put like a little chunk at the very end of almost every session I do, a little chunk for them to meet their higher self and answer, get a whole bunch of answers from questions. Like I always do that. So I have
Yeah.
a lot of folks that want to meet a higher self. Like, why would somebody want to meet their higher self from your perspective?
I think if they're looking for a greater perspective on their life, a lot of times they
Mhm.
recognize that they're too zoomed in, they're
Yeah.
too in the weeds, they're too emotional
Yes.
about something. They need a perspective that is removed, that is still, hanging out in the astral, with a greater perspective. And so the higher self is just incredible at providing that higher
Yes.
perspective. They want to understand why something happened to them. They want to understand why they're experiencing a certain ailment, physical issue. They want to understand why they're being faced with this decision, what decision to make. The higher self
Yeah.
can really provide a lot of guidance, I would say. And that's
And
how
they're
it's been
nice.
too. Oh,
They're
they're
so
nice and
nice.
they're
Like
funny.
they're funny. They have quirky personalities. Like let's talk
Sometimes,
about that actually. Let's talk about that in a minute because I know we've brought this up before in a QHHT one that we've talked about, but
yeah.
like they're so compassionate and kind and loving. Oh, I love the higher selves. Like they're really, and actually, when you meet them as a practitioner, you feel it in the room. Like you can
Mhm.
feel the warmth and the creativity and like I don't know, just like really good vibes. But yeah, let's talk about how sometimes the personalities are different because that's funny to me to
Yeah.
watch.
Yeah, and sometimes the voice of the person
Mhm.
changes when the higher self is coming through too. And sometimes the higher self just tells it like it is as well.
I like
So
that.
yeah, it's like loving and nice. And sometimes that doesn't mean that it's like speaking in these beautiful flowy sentences. Sometimes it's literally like giving you a smack across the face with
Yeah.
what the message that it's delivering. So I've experienced that before too, where the higher self is just yeah, no holds barred, no bars hold, what I don't know, no
Yeah, yeah, you're right. Where they just say
phrases
it like
that.
it is. And actually,
Yeah.
sometimes they need that. Like I've even personally
Yeah.
had like my higher self is like, dude, enough with this. Like, can you move on about that now? And you're like, okay,
Yeah.
but it's not like rude. It's actually a very loving, it's kind of the
Loving.
thing you need because sometimes the higher self will say it in a way that's really kind and like quiet and encouraging. And then other times it's
Mhm.
firm, but it's always very loving.
And I
But
think it's
yeah, their
exactly what you
voices
need.
change.
Yeah, it's going to come through in the frequency that that person needs at the time.
Yeah.
And sometimes they need to laugh about it. And so the higher selves are going to come and cracking jokes. Sometimes they just need to experience this like nurturing mother like energy. And so it will come in with that. But I think it really does shift based on what will be received the best way and like what's really needed for a person at that time. And
Yeah.
yeah, I think just to like touch on like societal commentary again, like we started off talking about how you and I didn't really grow up with the concept of
Mhm.
the higher self. And I honestly think that part of that is almost a design too. Like I would say
Mhm.
Western culture in general um, is quite removed from any inner guidance, and we're taught to often look to outer authority for making
Agreed.
decisions. And that's also how I was brought up, was to look to others to help me make decisions.
Yeah,
And
good point. Mhm.
I wasn't taught to go in and, really feel into like what maybe what intuitively I'm sensing I should do.
Yes.
And so I think there's been a big cultural shift now where people are becoming more empowered to receive insight from themselves. Not everybody, but a lot of folks are on the train of, I'm tired of looking for, a certain
An
religion tell me
authority
what to
figure.
do, an
Yeah.
authority
Mhm.
figure, my
Mhm.
parents. I'm tired of just listening to my conditioning. I'm tired of listening to
Yeah.
another like channel on YouTube. Like
Right.
I want to follow
Internal
my inner
authority.
guidance. I
And
want
that makes
inner authority.
sense. Mhm. That checks with the Saturn returns because I
Yep.
think that's part of ideally what astrologically the Saturn returns represents
Mm,
is a return to your knowing, your
yeah.
inner knowing, your intuitive side,
Mm,
your wisdom within, because I think we need the exterior, we need the external. The way that I always say it is like a metaphor is like you need to be able to construct your home in order to deconstruct your home and then reconstruct your home. So, for example, when you're a kid, you're given all of the things that you need from external sources to construct something that feels safe and that you can kind of walk around and live in as yourself, right? But when you get to that Saturn returns or your quarter life crisis, whatever you want to call it, you literally have to deconstruct it. You have to tear it all apart. You have to be like, who gave me this? Like, who made me believe this? Like, I don't know. I don't know if I really believe this. You have to critically reflect on all of that crap that was in your original house and you deconstruct it. But then, and a lot of times what happens when people do that is like, let's say you were born religious and then like you deconstruct it and then all of a sudden you're an atheist, right? That's
mm-hmm.
very common. But the reconstruction happens when you decide, I think I want to take a little piece of something back. And like maybe I have a new spiritual understanding of like, it's not one of these or that, it's this, and this doesn't have a name. And so maybe you keep the old sofa that was in the first house, you put that back, but then you build all new walls of a different understanding of what to believe because you're never really liked what your parents gave you and you want to make your own. And so, really, we're all living in these Frankenstein houses as adults because we had to destroy what we were given as children and rebuild it. But some of it's like stuff we liked as a kid, and some of it's brand new. And I think that the higher self helps you reconstruct it.
I think so too. I think the higher self, having that anchor is a really helpful frequency anchor. And I know Katie, you and I talked about this in one of our other episodes about how terms like higher self, and even if you're using other ascended masters or other things, it's all just like the terminology is helping you pinpoint the frequency of that
Yeah.
that
Oh,
source.
yeah,
And
we
so
talked about that.
when
Yeah.
you can say in a meditation, let's say, or in a hypnotherapy session, I'd like to hear from my higher self, in comes that frequency.
Yeah.
And it's just really helpful in providing that remembrance as well. I feel like a lot of times my higher self is helping me remember. I'm like, oh my God, like,
Yeah.
I'm not this crazy, like high energy, do everything person. Like my higher self is like reminding me that, that message that was coming through earlier on in like my mid-20s of like slow down. Like I'm actually much more regulated and a
Yeah.
lot more satisfied with my life when I do take things slowly, when I create space in my life. And
It
like my
sounds
higher
like
self
your higher
reminded me of that.
self. Yeah. It sounds like your higher self and everyone's higher self, to be honest. It's holistically looking out for you, right?
Hmm.
Meaning more like your ego might be better for your ambition
Mm-hmm.
and making a name for yourself and your career, but your higher self will tell you things that are more holistic and sometimes go against the grain of some of your goals, because some of our goals are quite egoic driven. And so when your higher self's like, yo, you don't work after 7, like relax. And you're like, oh, I gotta push myself. And then you burn out. It was like the higher self was trying to tell you, like, you're gonna be all right. Like if you relax after 7, you'll be fine. So it does know
Mhm.
you in a different way that isn't egoically driven or whatever.
Oh yeah, and I mean, I think it's a big important point is like the higher self is also pretty much never almost going to tell you exactly what to do or
Yeah.
how to do it unless it's like time for you to hear that. A lot of times if you start hearing things like it's bossing you around or trying to tell you what to do, if you're like trying to channel your own higher self, you're probably not actually tapping into the higher
Yeah,
self. You're
good
hearing
point.
from your ego or part of your mind. Because whenever I'm talking to the higher self, a lot of times the first message that comes through is everything's all right.
Yeah, you're right.
And even though I'm in like terror over like some crazy life change, my landlord just said like we have 30 days to move out of my house and I'm sitting there
Yeah.
like one way I like to connect with my higher self is by like writing.
Let's talk about
Um,
that next. Like, let's go
yeah.
right into that. How do you connect to
Yeah.
your higher self? So you're a writer. Go on.
Not always, but it kind of depends on just like where I'm at. But a lot of times, sometimes writing just creates a little bit of distance from my mind. Where if I'm just writing down quickly what I'm hearing, I can trick my mind into saying, I'm just writing what I'm hearing. And it's not thinking, I'm trying to get guidance from my higher self right now. It's like,
Yeah.
I'm writing. That's my job. I'm
Yeah.
writing. So then it can just write. And then afterwards, I read the message and I'm like, oh shit, that's pretty helpful.
Yeah.
That's really helpful for me. It's also sometimes I can just quietly, get into a meditative state, a trance state, and then just hear some guidance from my higher self too. Back when I had more time before kids, I like to journey to meet my higher self. I
Yeah.
would like almost like in a shamanic journey style, use my drum and bring myself into trance and have like an
Mm.
experience where I would visually see and experience higher self, and that was beautiful too. But I don't take that much time for that anymore. But the writing is really
You need to
helpful.
teach your kids how to do the drum.
They love my drum, the
Yeah, they
cutest
should do
thing.
it for you.
Yeah, and
You're
it's
like,
really
yo, mommy needs to get that higher self. Come on, get that beat going.
drum, let's drum. Sometimes when they do drum and they want to sing like that, it does almost feel like they're telling me like, Mama, like take a minute, connect with yourself,
Yeah,
let's sing and
I
drum.
like
And
that.
I mean, they're big champions. Children are big champions of us, especially the ones coming through these days. It seems like
I
they're
think so
just
too.
here to help us learn. But yeah, what about you? How do you like to connect with higher self?
I don't write enough. I feel like that's a good idea. I should try that because I do journaling, but my journals are never like automatic like that. I like that idea. I should
Yeah.
try that more often. I'm a good old-fashioned trance state higher self connector where I like to put myself to trance and kind of get up into that higher self. But I do it a lot of dance. Like, and it can be like pop dance, like I'll go dancing at a club and like in the middle of it, I'll just be kind of like, I have a moment where I'm just like, I can feel it all coming through. And I know a lot of people like ecstatic dance, right? What I love to hear is when I ask the clients to say like, how do I reconnect with you? The higher self will always give an advice on that. And it's
Mhm.
always different. Yeah, some are like meditate, but some are like, oh, I'm here with you in the shower. Or like, oh, remember that time on the road trip? Like I'm on long drives with you, or like I'm on the treadmill with you. And like they all say something different. And
Mhm.
that's really reassuring to me that it's a real being that we're talking to, because I find when you're in trance, like every once in a while, you want to make sure that your client is really connected to something. And when they have kind of like a boilerplate answer, you're like, I'm not sure. But a lot of times they're very specific of like, remember
Mhm.
that time when this happened? Like that, I was with you then. And like, that's how you can connect with me. And I find that everybody's different.
Mhm. Yeah, I've experienced that too, where they say, "Oh, when you're singing, like that's a way that I come
Mm,
through," and
like that.
unexpected ways too. Sometimes, like I think the higher self has to get creative sometimes. So they'll say,
Yeah.
the messages that you keep seeing, the red birds you keep seeing, that's me. I'm
Yeah.
sending those. Like I'm sending you those messages. The
Yeah.
butterflies that you keep seeing, like sometimes that's also how they kind of get through, at least to give you a little wink. Just
Yeah.
let you know it's okay. Not everybody is at a place where they can receive maybe full sentences or, a lot of details from their higher self, but everybody is probably getting little clues all the time. Uh,
Yeah, and that's the
yeah.
accidental way. And like we forget sometimes you could just ask, right? The
Hmm.
purposeful way is being like, yo, higher self, hook me up, need you. You know,
Hmm.
like you can just ask and then they'll be there. But it's like you're right, you have to kind of create yourself an environment to receive it. And if you are quite successful at meditating, it's quite easy. If you can get into trance, it's quite easy. But for those of us that are like, I hate doing that, you kind of need other routes to get that
Yeah.
calmer mind because it is, like you said, is a frequency. You know, we were making
Hmm.
the joke. I'm remembering that episode now because we made the joke of like, you're listening to Christ FM. I remember that we were
Right.
we were making the joke about how like each radio dial, if you still remember radios, because our generation does, each radio dial had like, you know, a station. And we found that that was kind of like the way you connected with like Christ, Buddha, Guan Yin, you know, whatever. You just kind of like change the frequency and then you could get into that frequency of that energy. And I think the
Hmm.
higher self is that. And so when we're in our normal life, we're like in a frequency way over here, and it's like you need to be able to dial the frequency into a totally opposite direction to calm it enough to get the higher self. Because otherwise, you're thinking about like making tacos tonight and not, you know, life guidance.
Hmm. Yeah. And it's so funny because sometimes the higher self is also going to say things that you don't want to hear. I remember
Yeah.
earlier on in my entrepreneur journey, my higher self, I would go to it with like, okay, what do I do next for my business? I'm like, do I work on a post for Instagram? Do I do this thing? Do I work on my website? Do I da da da? And then my higher self would say, you need to rest. And I'd be like, "Well, I don't have time to rest, I'm like, what? Like, no, like I've got to
Yeah,
get shit done. And I can't tell you how many instances I had of that and probably ignored it a lot too because it was inconvenient.
totally.
So sometimes the higher self is also going to come
It's
forward with some
inconvenient.
inconvenient advice.
That's true.
And that's probably a sign it's the higher self actually talking to you, but it's
You're
something that
right. It
you
is,
don't want to
you're
do.
right. Or it'll say something like, hey, look, like you can do that, but it's gonna make it harder for you.
Yeah.
Like, you know, like, and you'll be like, but I'm gonna do it. You know, I'm like, I feel
Yeah.
like, don't you feel like you and me have sent each other memes before about like our higher self or like our spirit guides, like watching us make decisions, like
Oh yeah.
I
Oh
told
yeah.
her, and then she still, but I think that's part of the agreement we made for free
Hmm.
will for this material realm, that like, you know, we have all of these cords to all of this support that's available to
Yeah.
us at any time. I feel like they're those old fashioned, like those tin cups that we had when we were a kid, or like calling the higher self, and it's like attached to a string and the other person's like in another tin cup like, hey, yeah, I'm here. Like we have those all the time. But I think there's
Yeah.
a stubborn side of us, and I'm so guilty of this, where like I have like an opportunity right now in my life to like ask my higher self and my guides like for really specific advice on something. I'm like, well, I don't care what they say because I want to do it my way. And it's like I'm stubborn. I'm stubborn and they know it. They know we're stubborn. And I think that's why sometimes they don't like interfere with us unless it's really important because they think, well, she chose to be material. We'll leave her
Hmm.
alone, you know.
Hmm.
But when you ask
Yeah.
for guidance, they do. They help.
Yeah, they're there. They're there to help. But I agree with you. And sometimes you just got to have that human experience and just stay really human in it and just do whatever your human side of you really wants to do. And that whole astral side with that greater perspective, like, yeah, you'll figure that all out later. And I
Yeah.
think that's part of the ride too. I mean, it's the reason we are embodied is because they're there, but it doesn't mean you have to follow exactly what you hear. Like, you don't have to go to them for every little decision either. I think
Yeah. My
and in a lot
friend
of ways,
once,
the higher self is like working subconsciously through you too.
I think
Even
so.
I would say, like your inner authority is oftentimes just linked to your higher self, kind of knowing what's best for you, and because you know
Yeah.
what's best for you. Like I would say that the higher self is not like necessarily like smarter than you, or like a lot of
Right.
times you're actually very linked to the higher self, and so whatever perspective they have, like yeah, it's a greater perspective. They may know how things are going to turn out, but there's still an inner compass within yourself that's kind of moving you in different directions. So I also like to point out that there's not like a tier status system here where like the higher self is like above you.
Mm,
And I wouldn't make the higher self God and you're like a peon. You're both like aspects of spirit. You're
yeah.
just embodied and it's like out in the astral. So sometimes like you may know better
Yeah.
what your body needs. You're not going to go to your higher
Yeah.
self necessarily for like, well, what should I eat next? Like maybe that's just something your body's going to cue you into.
Your human body. Yeah,
Yeah.
like I like the concept of like those little necklaces that you break apart, the best friends necklaces, and it's like one
Mm.
just stayed up in a different, safer, more ethereal realm, and one came down to the more material realm. But I find the reason, in my opinion, that we always feel eternal longing and eternal seeking and eternal discomfort and like unease is because there is another piece of us out
Mhm.
there, and that we can reconnect with that. And I think what happens for a lot of us is we're seeking outside of ourselves to fill that piece,
Mm.
especially with like partners and like friends and things. We're just trying to fill that like hole, and it never really works, right? Like it never really fully scratches the itch and like quells that longing. And I think once we start to recognize reconnecting to the side of us that is the all-knowing, all-loving, all-compassionate version of us, and like you start to feel the pieces kind of connect more, and you feel more whole, because that's the only way that you will feel whole, is by filling yourself with you, if that makes
Mhm.
sense. It's like
Yeah.
and I think that's super common, and that's like the human experience, that like we have to be like, I have an empty piece. I might as well fill it with the many things that I see in my life and see what feels good. And some of them will, right? Some of them will feel like
For a little
enough for a
while.
while. Yeah. But it'll always leave you longing for more. And so, what happens when we then replace that seeking of, my partner should fill every last bit of me, complement me like a perfect yin yang? What happens when, instead of putting like our partner on such a pedestal, we just put ourselves, and we try to reconnect to ourselves so that we don't have that longing? I personally like that way of looking at things, but it might be hard for somebody to see it that way if the higher self is a completely new concept to them.
Yeah. I will say, as someone who's worked with the higher self for many years now, my life seems to be getting better and better. My
Mm-hmm.
experience of my life seems to be getting better and better the more that I accept and appreciate and yeah, as I like merge my sides together, that like, yes, I am this embodied human having a very human experience. And yeah, it's really hard sometimes understanding too that there's more that meets the eye going on here.
Yeah.
And that really does help me. Ram Dass has this saying of like living life where you have one eye looking up and one eye looking down. Like you're
Mm.
living your life, you're not too much in the astral, too much trying to just, channel different beings out there.
Yeah.
You're also having a very human experience here. And I find the more that I allow myself to have my human experience, but allow the perspective to come in and take me away from reactivity, the more enjoyable my life is. And like the
Yeah.
more I can see all the little threads and the storylines, because honestly, like that high and lows of drama and stuff, like I'm just outgrowing that as a spirit,
Yeah.
I think, in this current incarnation. I'm like really outgrowing the need for like crisis and drama and like massive fear to spur me along. I'd really rather live a very human experience, like a really grounded human experience, but out of like joy and fun and experimenting and having that greater view, especially like that the higher self brings in, that frequency of the higher self brings in, that there's more than meets the eye.
And I'll expand on that even more, to the point of, wow, Sarah, what a gift it is for when someone realizes that they have an infinite self. Because when you were saying, like, I no longer want this fear and these things like influencing me and like, pulling me every which way,
Hmm.
I believe we are entering an era in all countries that we are all being manipulated and pulled every which way. And there's never been a
Hmm.
greater um, challenge for humanity's attention than now. And our attention is being pulled in every which way. And where attention follows, so does belief systems and programming and that kind of stuff. And I think when you're rooted and grounded in the material realm, but you don't have an awareness of your infinite eternal self, you can kind of be like pulled easily. But I think if
Mhm.
you're aware of like that infinite self as like the whole, you're not as easily manipulated. You're not
Yeah.
thrown. You're not using the expert's opinion on something because your higher self is like, no, bullshit. I call bullshit. That's bullshit. Don't follow the bullshit. And I think that's really going to be helpful where this generation of, both us and the people below us run the risk of being yanked in every
Mhm.
which way for the next, however many years. And so having that rooted foundation on earth, but then wherever else that spiritual space is in your higher self will let you avoid the chaos that may be ensuing, if that makes
Mhm.
sense. I mean, I could go
That
deeper
makes
into that, but I think you
sense.
know what I'm talking about.
I know we could just do a whole nother episode on like
Let's do
what is
it.
happening in the
Mhm.
culture scape around that and the war for
Next
our
episode, ladies
attention
and
and for
gentlemen.
our
Yeah.
frequency. Uh,
Yes. Let's do that.
Beautiful.
Let's do an episode like that of like, why is personal, like preview, why is personal development and seeking so vital to the like health of the collective? Right. Cause I
Hmm.
think that's what it is. Cause a lot of people are like, oh, it's a luxury to like navel gaze and look and find your higher self. But it isn't, because it's like when you listen to your higher self and then you teach your kids and your family to listen to your higher self, then you have a unit that's not falling for the bullshit. And then
Hmm.
that unit and more units start to realize like, not falling for that.
Yeah. And in that you get a lot of personal power, a lot of family
Yeah.
power, community power,
Yeah.
back to yourself. I mean, I see people living completely different realities right now based on what
Yeah.
they believe,
Yeah.
because that just creates perspective. And I see like, lots of groups of people living in like complete fear. So yeah, it's really something. But I think back to our topic, the higher self really does help create that expanded awareness. And you know what? You don't have to work with someone to get into higher self. Like as far
No.
as it being like a privilege to do that, it's free. And um, I think something that can be really empowering.
Same. You don't need us. I would love it if you used us, but you could
Yeah.
run, you could go on a long run, access the higher self, middle of the run, right? You can go
Mhm.
on a long drive, in the middle of the drive, you kind of almost are like focused and in a hypnotic state, access your higher self. So it's like, it's free, it's available. They're always rooting for you. Yeah,
Mhm.
that's the higher
Yeah.
self.
But I will plug us and just say if you're interested in connecting deeper with your higher self and creating more connection that you can maybe hear even more clearly from your higher self, hypnotherapy is an amazing tool to do that. And I know personally it's really helped me build that deeper, easier connection to my higher self so that I can hear from that aspect of me much
My
easier.
favorite my favorite part of when I have a client that's going to reach their higher self is we have you and I both make them write the questions down and give the
Hmm.
questions to us. And I tell
Hmm.
the client every single time, because here's what's going to happen to you. You're going to be so deep in trance that when you meet your higher self, because usually you meet your higher self in the deepest part of your trance. So it's like usually about 35 minutes in or more. And when you meet your higher self, I'm going to say to you, do you have any questions for your higher self? And you're going to say, no, because you're going to be so like blown away by the fact that the higher self is there and it feels so good and loving and comfortable that you're like, no, I'm good. And then as the practitioner, I'm like, yeah, that's the only reason you're here. And so I have all of the questions and then we say the questions and
Yeah.
we say, okay, what should Sarah do about this? And then they receive the answers via the higher self and they verbalize them and we're taking notes and we're recording it so that you can have those answers later. People remember them, but it's like you want them to have somebody else who can say the questions, because as we have all experienced when you're doing self-hypnosis or maybe you're high on psychedelics or something like that, you always figure it all out, but then you forget
Hmm.
because
Yeah.
you don't have it written down and nobody was helping you get the answers like straight and keep them in some linear form. So that's really where a hypnotherapist does well. You don't need us, but I think that we're more of like the organizers of the
Hmm.
information. And then you get the information from us afterwards to take home and really like chew on it.
Yeah, and I've had sessions with Katie. I know this is true for me too. We ask follow-up questions too.
Yes.
So if they are just giving a one-word answer or a really vague answer, we're going to ask the follow-ups. It's going to be a
Yes.
conversation with the higher self where you just get
Yeah.
to allow yourself to stay in trance, be the channel. You don't have to consciously think about anything. I really
Yeah.
appreciate that you called out that difference, Katie, because sometimes people are like, I mean, how's it even going to help me? But it's like,
Yeah.
imagine you just get to lay there and not worry about exactly what you want to ask about. Your mind can really relax and just allow the information to come forward. I remember the questions. I got your back.
Yeah. I've got it. You sit there and relax. I like to do the whole, like, when you have how questions, because a lot of times I'll be like, make it in form of a how so that they have to show you. I like to
Mhm.
often ask the higher self, like, please show them in a montage scene many different times
Mm.
that this will happen and like how they're going to do it. And I love that because the answers that people come up with are like, oh, I see myself doing this and I see myself doing that. And wow, now I'm doing this. So it's like that helps you later in life when you're in those moments to like be like, oh, this was prophetic. I was told that I would do this. And like,
I've seen
those,
this before.
it validates it. It validates your experience more. Cause like if you just hear it of like, just do that, and then like you don't see how,
Yeah.
you won't necessarily feel as connected to the answers. Yeah. But this
Hmm.
is great. Do you have anything else
Really
about the
fun.
higher self that you would like to share before we finish this one?
I'm ready to put a bow on it. That was lovely. Anything you want?
Boom. Higher self, baby. You are gonna
A
love
good one.
yours. They're
Yep.
good. They're good. All right. Look for our info and the captions below and reach out if you would like to get in touch with us. Take care.